Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We will later in the programme be turning our attention to the government's decision, or the government's discovery, of £50 million to go towards grammar schools at a time when most teachers, many teachers, well, we'll find out actually, are reporting that they're having to bring food and toilet paper to their schools because the funding crisis is so acute. But Theresa May knows which side of her bread to keep buttered, you may argue. We'll look also, I think, at the calls for 16 and 17-year-olds to get a vote. I know that this is the final evidence of encroaching middle age for me, but there's a story in the news about potholes. Seriously, it's going to make your hair stand on end. I kid you not. But we will begin, I suspect, well, I know, because I decided about 4 minutes ago, with a conversation about the junk food ban on public transport.
Junk food adverts could be banned from tubes, trains and buses in London under new proposals from the Mayor. Sadiq Khan says he wants to tackle what he calls the ticking time bomb of childhood obesity in London, where 2 out of 5 10 and 11-year-olds are overweight or obese. But the advertising industry says the move would have little impact. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
This is the sort of advertising which the London Mayor wants to take out of the public transport system, at bus stops, on the sides of buses themselves, or down in the London Underground, in ticket halls, or on routes out of the stations.
So what we're saying to brands, companies, is if you want to advertise healthy foods, you can do so on the public transport network. But if you want to advertise unhealthy foods, and these are foods high in fat, high in sugar, high in salt, you've got to go elsewhere.
The Mayor says action's needed because almost 40% of London primary school leavers are overweight or obese. That compares to an average for England of 33% of primary school leavers. And with 30 million passenger journeys a day on London public transport, it's believed the new advertising restrictions will make a difference. The only other European city to go down the same route is Amsterdam, where a ban on unhealthy food ads on transport systems has helped reduce child obesity. For campaigners like Jamie Oliver, new rules are essential.
We've got to be sensible, we've got to be logical, we've got to protect our kids. We want businesses to be able to be commercial, but there are rules to the game. Historically, there hasn't been. Sadiq stood up and says there's rules to the game. Play or get out, and that is fair enough.
McDonald's said it was committed to responsible marketing and was working with experts on healthy meal options. According to the advertising industry, there are already strict curbs on media campaigns for young audiences.
I think current regulations do the job because they are amongst the strictest in the world. They apply across all media. It's not just about the placement of the advertising, it's about the content of the advertising. And the rest of the world tends to look to the UK for leadership.
So do people support a complete ban on junk food advertising on London's transport network?
It should be banned, especially just for the kids, you know, bombarding them with all this images of all this food, which they probably want, and it's not good for them, is it?
I think bans don't work, and no, I don't think it's a good idea.
I actually don't think it's appropriate to be advertising junk food anywhere.
Nationally, policies to curb food advertising in England are expected soon. The Scottish Government is planning a strategy targeting cheap supermarket promotions of less healthy products. Stand by for big changes in the way food is marketed to families. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
A ban which I am massively in favour of, but I couldn't really tell you why. Here's the weird thing. Bear with. I have this image of a mum, I don't know why, I'm going to say a single mum who left school at 16, not someone that's been deeply immersed in the educational system. I want that to be clear. But then immediately, politically, you find yourself in that slightly precarious position of seeking to legislate for people who you don't think are as clever as you are, which is not a good look. Except for the fact that it is basically politics, given that, you know, just under 50% of the country are of below average intelligence. I appreciate that there are people in the House of Commons way, way, way below average intelligence, but they don't realise it, and quite a lot of them went to schools like mine, where you pay a large sum of money to learn how to camouflage your lack of intelligence for the rest of your life. But generally speaking, this junk food ban helps that mum, I think, because I could sit here until I was blue in the face talking about the dangers of saturated fats and salt and sugar, and you could register it, you could sort of absorb some of it. You don't, unless you're a fully paid up member of the troll farm. You don't sit by the radio painstakingly hanging on my every single syllable. You have me burbling away in the background. And you might listen to 20 minutes on one day and 3 hours the next, and none at all the day after. So just this, and that's how media works. And these messages that come out of the media, whether it is a visionary like Jamie Oliver trying to get his message across, or whether it is a journalist trying to understand the issues, it just drips away. And the plan or the hope is that it will encourage people to eat a little bit more healthily, reduce the obesity crisis that threatens every fibre of the nation's fabric, and the medical ramifications as well that stay with people throughout their lives. The idea that there's anything remotely controversial about trying to come up with ways to get people to eat less rubbish, it's one of the great mysteries of our time. It's the rhetoric of the nanny state. Absolutely absurd. What's wrong with nannies? Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, back in LBC on Monday, he used to go canvassing with his. So we wonder, first and foremost, why people have a problem with anyone who seeks to make children healthier. But then we have the problem of not knowing why it works. Because the image I always use, the example I always share with you, and I think it's a good example, is that young mum who hears these messages, and she may never have heard them, but we're going to presume that, you know, she's got LBC on in the background and I'm burbling away about it, or she's sort of tuned into one of those television programmes with Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, or someone stuck it on her Facebook page, those great images of how much sugar there is in fizzy drinks because they've actually, you know, put it in little plastic bags. She's not going out of her way to look for this information, but it may be landing in her inbox. So put that on one side of the scales, right? How heavy is it? There's nothing on the other side of the scales at the moment, so that side of the scales goes whoomp, right down. That's it. It's there, the weight. Now, consider what's on the other side of the scale, because the other side of the scale is the side that's dedicated to encouraging that young mother to buy hugely sugared or salted or fatty foods and drinks for her baby, for her child. How heavy is the weight on the other side of the scale? I haven't checked, but I think I heard Nick say 10 million quid is what the advertising companies currently trouser, or what TfL trousers from the junk food adverts. So 10 million quid straight up, just on public transport, bus shelters. I always think of the bus shelters, because imagine if you were listening to this programme on the bus and it was one of the days when Jamie joins us. I think he might be talking to us later in the programme. I have to wait and see. And he was explaining, as he always does, very passionately about why he cares. He would never put it like this, I want to make that absolutely clear, but why he cares more about the health of some children than their own parents do. And he does explain it quite beautifully, quite often. So Mum's listening to it, and she's kind of just taking it in vaguely, and she's sort of, yeah, that's right, maybe I shouldn't. And then she gets off the bus. This is the thing, right? She gets off the bus, and on the walk home, which let us say is a 20-minute walk, it's not just the proliferation of fast food joints that she passes, because she may not pass that many, but every billboard and bus shelter is likely to contain an advertisement for sugar. Not like a pound of Tate and Lyle, but some sugar that has been melted down and mixed with food colouring and some mild flavourings and turned into sweets, or sugar that has been very loosely diluted with water and carbonated with some other flavourings and turned into fizzy pop, or fat and salt that has been cunningly combined to create some delicious chicken-based snack that remains mostly fat and salt. And this is her journey home, right? And these billboards aren't whispering in her ear, buy chicken, buy sweets, but they're just creating, I think. And what I like about the conversation that I'm trying to start here is that it's all thinking, because none of us know, because this hasn't been done before. So I think that the environment created by these advertisements and by the scale, the quantity and the quality of these advertisements, I think it undoes the tiny amount of good work that campaigners like Jamie Oliver and Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall have managed to do in the context of junk food. Because you've got some fella, whether it's a toff like Fearnley-Whittingstall or whether it's the son of an Essex publican like Jamie Oliver, it doesn't matter socially. They're coming from very different places with a very similar message. And I just think that message gets completely drowned out by the adverts, because the adverts create an environment of normality. They create a climate in which those voices saying don't feed your children sugar, don't feed your children salt, don't feed your children fat on the scale that we're currently doing, they're rendered a bit ridiculous. This is just me. It's entirely me. They're rendered kind of absurd, because you would think, and this is the danger in legislating for people who are nowhere near as intelligent as I am, it kind of strikes me that subconsciously that mother, that young woman, is, by a process of what I would describe as intellectual osmosis, she is absorbing, or possibly emotional osmosis actually, she's absorbing subconsciously the idea that this stuff is good. Not just that it's not bad, which would be the contrary to the message being promoted by the campaigners, but that it's actually good. You know, that bloke with his top off, drinking that drink, he's buff, guys. He looks hot. So that drink must be good. The children in that advert for that industrial strength drink, they're really happy. They're smiling. They've got really good complexions and lovely Bowden clothes. So the drink must be good. That family in that advert for those burgers, they get on really, really well. They seem to be really functional and happy. And look how slim they are. You never see an obese person advertising junk food. So they must be good, those burgers. I think I'll buy some for my baby on the way home. And then you have to, as you register those scales, because I think we could both agree now, couldn't we, that the side where the money is being spent on encouraging us to feed our children rubbish weighs approximately a gazillion times more than the other side, where a couple of people who are usually doing it out of the goodness of their heart and unpaid are seeking to persuade us not to feed our children rubbish. We can all agree now that those scales are horribly, horribly skewed, right? So now, the third leg of this stool is the question of how much money is spent on persuading us to feed our children good stuff, like fruit and vegetables, not fruit juice, funnily enough. Amsterdam, which has led the way on these sort of measures, has banned fruit juice from schools. The results are plain to see, but we're not Dutch. So it doesn't necessarily follow that it will definitely work here. But just consider for a moment how much money is spent on persuading us to give our children a glass of water. I mean, mineral water advertising aside, and most of us are unlikely to buy mineral water for our children. Mineral water advertising aside, when is the last time that you felt, as a parent, actively encouraged to give your child a glass of water? When's the last time you saw an advert for a glass of water? When's the last time you turned on the radio and heard a lovely jingle encouraging you to give your children water? You know what you ought to give your children water. Be kind to your daughter and your son. You can have that for nothing. Well, thank you very much. I don't know quite where that came from. But you take my point. It never happened. I remember as a kid things like marketing boards. There was one for milk. I presume there was one for healthier stuff as well. That is not the nanny state. That is the government seeking to create a healthier population. Can there be any more important role for government than helping a population to help itself? In this case, to be healthier. So I think, and I haven't read much about this or watched any docos or anything like that, but I think that that's how it works. It creates an environment in which somebody who's far too busy to be reading doctoral theses or studying food policy, or even too busy to be concentrating when a blowhard like me is banging on the wireless, it creates an environment in which not only do these voices of caution and concern get drowned out, but the opposing voices, the voices telling you to pour sugar down your baby's throat, are simultaneously really loud and somehow attractive. It's not just a case of being encouraged to do it. You're being encouraged to do it by the myth represented in the adverts that is probably best summed up by observing that you've never seen a fat fella in a burger ad. And yet you've never been to a burger joint that isn't full of fat fellas. Funny that. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Call it now if you've got the vaguest idea what question I'm about to ask you, because at 10:16 I'm not sure I have. But I would love to have a crack at this. Why does it work? I mean, I may have just worked it out. I don't know. I'd love to hear from you. Why does it work? Why does junk food advertising work? Actually, no, that's presumptuous. Does junk food advertising work? And if so, how? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. It's 10:17. Why does it work? Well, I mean, it must work. Otherwise, they wouldn't spend millions of pounds of doing it. But can we get into this, like, on a really individual level? What adverts work on you? And why does junk food advertising prove so effective? I've talked enough. Let's hear some other voices. Luke's in Cardiff. Luke, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
yeah, basically, I was just listening, and it reminded me of in 2010 when I was writing my dissertation. So I did that on the effects of fast food advertising on our diet. And the answer to your question, does it work or why does it work? I think just because purely it's there, and it has to come down to government. It's shiny, it's bright, it's seen as fun. Its connotations are when you're a kid, it's seen as a treat, but it's not really a treat anymore. People do it every day.
Just take me back. So was this just for your bachelor's degree or your master's?
Yeah, a bachelor's it was.
Yeah, all right. And it was in junk food advertising?
Yes, yeah.
I'm just working out whether you deserve a Ray Liotta, but I'm getting told off at the moment for giving them out too liberally. I think it would have to be your PhD thesis, because an undergraduate thesis can be on any old rubbish. I can't even remember what mine was on. So, I mean, you must have arrived at a more sophisticated conclusion than that, Luke.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, it all started, I was waiting for a bus once in Uxbridge, and there's a teenage kid next to me, and the billboard changed on the bus, as you were talking about. That's what made me think of it earlier.
Go on.
And it changed to a 99p, burger, and he went straight to his pocket, he had £1, and he was gone.
Shut up.
So, seriously, yeah. He was
really?
And the McDonald's was just opposite the road.
Yeah, the well-known burger restaurant.
Yeah. Just opposite the road, and
it just happened. I mean, it was literally like is it Pavlov's dog? I mean, it was an impulse, and he responded to it.
It was literally that, and I kind of oh my god, and it sort of got me thinking a lot about obviously the effects of fast food advertising, and that's
really interesting. And your generation, what are you? 20 years younger than me?
Yeah, well, I'm 32.
Oh, no, all right. Well, yeah, nearly 20 years. So your generation and my generation have a very different concept of treats. I mean, my generation has been corrupted by all the advertising, but I loved what you said about a treat, because when I was a kid, and I don't think my mum and dad got this right, actually, because my sister and I still consume sweets on an industrial scale, and they were very, very strictly rationed when we were young. But it's a treat, and it's not good for you, and it's advertised as something that you somehow have a right to. You deserve it, and it does somehow tell you that it's good for you, because that advert, the 99p, it looks cheap, but the burger looked delicious and shiny and fresh. It didn't look manky and fatty and salty and bad.
Yeah, exactly. It's bright, it's in your face, and like I say, it almost
the families are always lovely.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at it and you think, well, how can that not be healthy? Look at it, it's so nice and bright.
That's the bit. That's the penny drop moment for me today, as I've done all the other stuff in my opening words. I've worked all of that out before, but I hadn't actually. I mean, the whole point of advertising, you never see some pustulant, zit-covered, kind of homunculus advertising fizzy drinks. What they should do, did you ever see that? You must have watched that Morgan Spurlock film when you were doing your dissertation.
Yeah.
Super Size Me, when the bloke decides that all he's going to do is live on junk food for a month and his body starts collapsing after about a week. Yeah. They should only be allowed to advertise junk food with people who exist on an exclusive diet of junk food.
Exactly.
The pictures would soon change, and TfL wouldn't lose any money because you just have pictures of big, fat, zitty people all over the London Underground. Might actually put you off eating anything, let alone junk food. Luke, thank you, mate. Very close to a Ray Liotta, but it was only his undergraduate thesis. If it had actually been a doctorate and he'd got it and he'd become Dr. Luke as a direct result of studying the impact of advertising upon junk food consumption, then I'd have reached for the Ray Liotta. But not today, Luke, not today. Next time. Peter's in Chertsey. Peter, what's going on?
Hi, James, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Peter. Not hungry yet, oddly, given the nature of the conversation, but carry on.
That's probably because you didn't come to work on the tube. I think, I mean, the key point about advertising, whether it's on the public transport network or anything, is, A, to feed impulses. And so you're sitting there, you look at an image, and that is meant to get your impulse going.
Yes.
There is also the price point, which is, for a lot of people, a determinant and a creator of demand.
And so they know what they're doing when they stick that 99p thing on the bus shelter sign, because Luke's experience has seen it literally impact.
And the really sad thing is that there's an extreme amount of the population which does feed itself for £1.
Yes.
And there's a really good example of this in the US, where there's a famous burger chain with yellow arches, which has something called a dollar menu.
Well, we have it here. You obviously don't go in very often. The 99p menu.
Correct. And when they changed that, there was massive outrage. And it's a proportion of the population which does have it as their staple diet. Now, do they know about calories? Do they know about obesity? Or is it just need? And the sad thing is, I think it's need.
Although,
so
I mean,
the impulse-led.
Yes.
And then you've got the value-led.
Yes. So why does, I mean, in terms of not having enough money in your pocket to buy anything else hot and filling immediately is one side of the coin. You're absolutely right. But the other side of the coin is the impulse purchase, as you say. Does the advertising, how does it work, do you think? Does it work on you?
Does it work on me? Yeah, I think it probably does. If you're sitting there on a hot tube platform and you see a photograph of a very nice cold fizzy drink in front of you, it probably makes me think to myself, I can quench my thirst if I was to have a nice hot fizzy drink which looks beautiful with lots of ice in it and a nice straw popping out. Yeah, I think it probably does.
And somehow you end up finding that more refreshing than the best thing to have, actually, is unsweetened tea on a hot day. I learned that as a building site labourer in Doncaster in 1988. But you don't...
You are right with your earlier point as well about, the Milk Marketing Board. Do you remember they used to have that really weird, a Jeffrey about or whatever? Watch out, there's a Jeffrey about. But, that seems to have gone. The government doesn't really fund those sort of
too busy funding grammar schools, which we will move on to later in the programme. Peter, thank you. I wonder if anyone could give me a call and absolutely own up to being a complete sucker for advertising. I'm bearing in mind this is a commercial radio station. I pay my mortgage with money that comes from advertising, so never in a million years would I want to see it cease or be banned across the board. But the places where children are most likely to encounter it, and the visual nature of billboard advertising, I think, speaks more to children than perhaps adverts on a radio station do. I wonder if you can just describe to me the moment of realisation that you were effectively brainwashed. Like Peter just said, that idea of you walk past an advert for an ice cream and then 10 minutes later you notice you've got one in your hand, and it almost happened without realising. Do you see? I think you understand me, even if I'm not making perfect sense. Charlie's in Cheltenham. Charlie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Morning.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, so I think the point I wanted to make was, you mentioned initially the issue of how advertising is sort of in the back of your mind, on bus shelters and things like that. But the main point I want to make is about the colour red.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at how many fast food restaurants and companies that will be involved in this actually involve the colour red. We know red is one of the most memorable colours, and actually, from a human being, you don't even actually have to, associate it with the restaurant we might be talking about. It's just you think of it. You look at how many things are red that we just automatically remember.
And is that a psychological trigger for us?
I think it may well be. I mean, if you think...
What do you mean you think it may well be? You've just run in to try out this theory live on my show, have you? You haven't got any... The first fella had written a thesis, Charlie.
Well, I'm just basing it on my experience of doing, a couple of studies at a university.
Fair enough.
And, I did, like one of the previous callers, now I haven't done a doctorate or anything like that, but my, experience goes as far as doing some studies at university.
Yes.
And, you can apply this colour red just to,
and
the relevant...
the more infant... I don't want to say infantile, but you know what I mean.
I appreciate, yeah.
The more it's going to impact upon you, It's a kids
right.
like shiny things, don't they? And as you grow older, you become a little bit more sophisticated. In some cases, for example, mine, not that much more.
Take the two biggest examples. Your previous caller, the two golden arches.
Yes.
What colour's that? The chicken place. What colour's that?
Yeah.
Pizza places. What colour's that? I literally just run you up. I looked on the sort of kind of who owns the major brands throughout the world, and all the fast food restaurants. I'd say 80% of them probably red.
And it creates a subconscious or an emotional sense that someone with more knowledge than you or I will be able to explain to us, that adds to my little notion of osmosis, intellectual and emotional osmosis. You absorb without realising the idea that this stuff is good. Now, there are phrases that I think are shorthand. They're very helpful to those of us with fully functioning intellects, phrases that mark other people out as complete, I'm going to put it politely, wallies. You use a phrase like nanny state or classical liberal. If you spend a lot of time, anyone who calls themselves a classical liberal is almost by definition a complete dork. And what they seem to believe is that everybody should be free to do whatever they want, and governments just interfere in our lives, which is great. I'd love to see them drive somewhere on roads that were not governed by laws or provided by governments. That would be fun, wouldn't it? It's a really weird... It's like for people who've never grown up, or who never got taught by their parents the importance of compromising and sharing. I should be able to do whatever I want. And that would be, I presume, the position that has a problem with the idea of banning advertising that is designed to encourage us to make our children poorly. Let's not beat about the bush, okay? Here would be the question if we decided to approach the topic from a slightly different angle today. Why do you think advertisers should be free to spend millions of pounds encouraging you to make your children fat and poorly? Call me now on 0345 6060 973. But I'm on slightly thin ice here. I have enormous amounts of freedom at LBC, more freedom for those of you who occasionally politely inquire how I stomach some of the company I'm compelled to keep. I have more freedom here than I could conceivably have anywhere else in the British media. But it's a freedom that hinges upon a commercial contract. You need advertisers. So you would never go too far in criticising advertising. I can do that question because it's true and I can prove it. Why would you want to... why would you not want to stop multinational conglomerates spending billions of pounds encouraging you to make your child fat and poorly? I can put it like that. And it's a question that I don't imagine you can answer now that you've seen it. But think about all of the people who are phrasing it otherwise and talking about nanny states and classical liberals and interfering and free choice. They are also a result of the billion-dollar brainwashing industry. They have been persuaded by, put it politely, people perhaps less moral than Jamie Oliver or someone like that. They have been persuaded that somehow encouraging them not to make their children fat and poorly is an assault upon their civil liberties or an affront to their freedoms. But they've been paid to do that. Make no mistake. The question is really, really simple. How much freedom should multi-billion-dollar conglomerates have to encourage you dishonestly to make your children fat and poorly? My short answer to that is a bit less than they currently have. That's all, a bit less. So what are you going to do? Take it off public transport, because that's where it's most unavoidable. Maria is in Greenford. Maria, what do you think?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
I just
Maria.
wanted to tell you about my experience, because I think a lot of the time these companies hypnotise you.
Yes, that's the word.
Into it. Right. Now, what happened to me was I knew somebody who worked for a very big advertising research agency, and for a fee they said, would I come in and I've just got to watch a few adverts, and it was an advert for a certain vegetable. That's all I'll say.
Why can't you tell me what the vegetable was? You're not going to get into any trouble.
Oh yes. Oh, peas. It was the peas.
Why were you being so coy?
Because the lady said not to mention...
Beth did.
Yeah, not to mention...
She told you not to mention peas.
Not to mention the company.
Was it Bird's Eye peas?
I'm not saying.
Well, she's good, that Beth, isn't she? She's got you well primed. Carry on, Maria.
Okay, so what they did was, I didn't know what I was going to do, and I had to sign all these papers. But what they did was they put all these electrodes on my head.
Pardon?
Electrodes. Are they electrodes to measure your brain pattern?
What? While you were watching pee adverts?
Yeah.
Oh. This
is how they get you to
well, you live and learn.
Yeah. So I had all these things on my head, which was linked up to a machine,
yes.
which then measured my brain pattern as I watched the advert. So they showed me 2 different adverts, and then I had to press a button when I saw a certain colour.
Right.
And then that measured on the machine. So it's all to... What they do is that they're researching. They do their primary research, secondary research, but their primary research is linked to your brain. So even if you don't like, I don't know, a certain chicken thing, your brain waves are automatically tuned to that because they know which colour or which company you are going to best zone into. Let's put it that way. It's like everybody knows the Golden Arches.
Yeah.
Yeah? So if they measured your brain pattern when you saw that figure, the machine goes really high. Do you see what I mean?
I do, yeah, I do.
But that is how...
So it worked. I mean, that's so crikey. I mean, I was a little bit disturbed by the notion of you having electrodes attached to your head, but I'm over this.
Electrodes, but you know...
They are electrodes. They are electrodes. Yeah, they're electrodes. No, but they didn't give you a little electric shock or anything like that.
No.
That's what I was thinking. I thought, crikey, I thought you'd been kind of perhaps misled. And you'd been led into some weird fetishistic dungeon by a bloke pretending to work for Frozen Pea Company. And it
was a bit weird because the room was pitch black.
Aye.
I was sitting in a chair on my own with these electrodes and just pressing this button when a certain colour or when a certain name came up. And they were at the time measuring my brainwave patterns. And that would improve their advertising.
Yeah, but so then the question of whether or not removing adverts from areas like public...
It won't make any difference.
Well, why not?
Well, because it might be advertised somewhere else.
Yeah, but don't be daft. It still helps because I'm not somewhere else. I'm on the tube, so I can't see the one that's somewhere else. I can only see the one that was there but isn't anymore, so I can't see it.
Yeah, but when you get out of the tube and you see that advert over and over and over again...
Yeah, but I'm going to see it less. The fewer there are, the less I will see it.
I don't think it makes any difference.
Well, I'm going to disprove you by citing the example of Amsterdam, which has partnered with the Alliance to Stop Child Marketing, or in Dutch or German, Alliantie Stop Kindermarketing. Have we got any results yet? No. This was September of last year, but I'm sure I saw yesterday, 6 months later, that the results had come in. I shall find those results for you, Maria, and I shall transmit them to your brain via electrodes.
My brainwaves.
I shall send brainwaves to Greenford to get that, because I think it will work. But I've been very interested, because, I mean, you're saying it won't work unless you get rid of all of them. I disagree. I think, you know, they would not spend the money they spend if they thought they could have the same impact by spending half. So even if you hang on, I'm being clever now, Maria, come back. Even if you halved the amount of advertising, there would be less success of the advertising. Otherwise, the companies wouldn't continue to pay for it on the grounds that you've just argued, saying, well, they could look at one somewhere else.
Yeah, but James, you have to look at, then you'd have to look at how many children actually use the tube. Is it going to be more effective on the buses?
It's on the buses as well, mate.
Inside the buses, I haven't seen...
It's on the bus shelters. It's on the bus shelters, TfL. The stuff that TfL has power over.
Well, you don't have any bus shelters around here, so this is what I'm saying.
What do you do if it's raining?
Well, we stand out in the rain then.
Oh, it's outrageous.
But it depends where the advertising is.
Yes.
And whether it has the impact on the child. That's what you've got to measure.
Yes, but this is a start, and that is why we criticise him for this sometimes. This is why the Mayor has a consultation in place. The idea that they will ask questions and get answers to reduce the influence and pressure that can be put on children and families to make unhealthy choices. And that would see the junk food banned from the entire tube and bus network. And, of course, I heard Sadiq Khan talking to Nick earlier, and he made the point that you can change the recipe of some of this stuff. Drinks in particular, I would have thought, would be ripe for the removal of sugar. The problem then becomes biological rather than psychological, I think, because we're addicted to sugar, all of us now. It is one of the hardest things to give up. And the kick you get out of it, whether you know it's there or not, it sort of fills you up again until the next kick. So the fizzy drinks, if you removed all the sugar, they would probably sell a lot less. And then I'm back to the question of, did we record that little jingle I did for water? Have we? I'd quite like to... Yeah, I'd quite like to maybe find an agent or something like that. Is Jamie going to be able to talk to us today? Is he around? Can I play it to Jamie Oliver, or would that be pathetic? I'll play my little slogan for water. Maria, take care. Watch out for those electrodes. Harry's in Harlow. Harry, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
I'm all right, mate. What's on your mind?
Right. It's a first-time caller. I'm not that nervous, hopefully. Right.
Good man.
I think it's totally wrong. I think it's totally wrong to ban it.
Right.
I think that if you're going to do it, instead of banning it and taking it away and they don't get any benefit, the companies, the kids will eat that food whether you've got it on the tube. 90% of their diet starts at home. Right?
Yeah, but they won't eat as much. I mean, unless you're arguing that advertising doesn't work, which you're perfectly entitled to do.
No, I'm not arguing advertising doesn't work. What I'm asking, I know it works, right? But what I'm asking is instead of taking that £20 million and putting it back into letting them keep it, how about raising the price of the advertising so you get more money and pump it into public services for kids to do...
It's not, unfortunately, that's not an option. I don't think we're going to have a ding-dong about this, because I like the idea, but the money that TfL raises from advertising is not going to make its way into public services.
Right, well, then there's something wrong there, isn't there? Right, if we look at last year, a group, me and a little group, redone up an area, a sports area in Harlow, put our own funding, we've done it all up. This thing's chained up. No kid ever used it. Now, every weekend, I see kids playing on it, every weekend. Now, why can't we do more of that? You know,
well, we can do both, mate. It's not either or.
Yeah, I just think...
and the point is, what you've done really is possibly argue yourself out of your original position, because if you think advertising works, and all the calls today have kind of proved that it does.
No, I agree.
And then it works on children.
It's not the best.
Well, and then you take away some of the advertising, and advertising works, then the opposite becomes true. Taking it away works too, which means kids will eat less rubbish. Of course it's a bigger issue, mate. Read the flipping proposals. No one's saying that we're going to get it banned and then stop and all go home. You think Jamie Oliver's going to concentrate on his business empire now and stop worrying about other people's children just after one ban of adverts on one part of transport in the country? There's loads of stuff to do. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that if you do that, you can't do that, or if you can't do that, you must do that.
But do you not think it would be better then if we raise the revenue and pumped it into something?
No, because the TfL's money has to be spent on the transport. You can't start. I mean, I'd like to see a little bit more nationalisation in areas of transport infrastructure, but you can't take the money out of. And they're not going to lose the money. This is another myth. They'll just put other adverts up. There's not like a.
No, I agree that. I
don't very see often empty spaces on the tube.
Obviously, I'm coming from a point of view where I don't know TfL's money's got to be spent in TfL, because from my point of view, I think it's a very simple thing. I would like to see it pumped into schools and learn.
I would as well, but that's not how it works. So in the meantime, you crack on doing your brilliant community work in Harlow. Some other brilliant visionary people and community-minded people will hopefully do similar. We'll carry on with the education, albeit that the figure is about a 50th of what is spent on advertising is spent on encouraging people to eat healthily, and all of these different strands pulled together to hopefully persuade more and more parents not to give rubbish to their children, and to persuade more and more children not to crave rubbish because they're not having these psychological triggers fired at their brains every time they pull into a station. So we can do it all, Harry.
Okay. All right, cool. Well,
all right? When I'm in charge...
Anyway.
When I'm in charge, mate, I'm putting you in charge of football pitches, all right?
Oh, that would be nice. I'll enjoy that.
Yeah, nice one. So, you know, keep your Sundays clear. It's 10:48. You know, now we've put the last fella in charge of football pitches, you know that under my glorious rule, Martin Lewis is in charge of money and Jamie Oliver is in charge of food. And this is a big result for the latter campaigner today, the Mayor of London's decision to, well, move towards a ban on junk food adverts on the London Underground. I'm delighted to say that Jamie Oliver joins me on the line now. You're pleased, I'm going to predict, but you're conscious that this is the beginning of a process rather than the end of a process, Jamie.
Yeah, morning, James. Thank you for having me. Yeah, no, look, this is big because Sadiq has been clear and bold. He's looked, just to remind your listeners, this is the biggest advertising real estate on the planet.
Is it?
You know, yes. And they have basically decided that there needs to be standards about what influences are in front of our kids going to school, going on buses, going on trains. When I walk today to school, there's 10, 20 kids next to a massive Domino's Oreos advert. That's a digital screen, that's strategic, that is targeted. And I think when you look at the statistics of London kids being the most overweight or obese in any major city on the planet, it's just gone nuts. So I think today's announcement from Sadiq, for anyone thinking it's bad, it's not bad. You can still buy your Domino's. It's just we think that it's maybe not okay to relentlessly advertise to them on screens, phones,
indeed,
and on TFL.
And other pizzas are available, of course. What do we know about how it works? Because I know, and thank you for talking to us. You're on your way back from the school run, judging by the wind in the background. But how does it work? How does that advert that you just described, what does it do to a young person's brain that is so hard to resist?
Well, let's just be very, very clear. These companies are not charities, and they do not work in enriching civic society. They are selling a product, and they advertise because it works. They advertise because they get multiple benefits on sales. And ultimately, over the last 40 years, what we've seen is, you know, well, let's just put it one way. What we're now working out through, you know, just joining the dots is that obesity and diet-related disease, which is complex, is a normal response to an abnormal environment. What does that mean? It means in 40 years, everything's changed. So the amount of meat in your sausage. So people always say, oh, you took away the turkey twizzlers. No, I didn't. They reformulated them because we created standards, and you got more meat in your turkey twizzler. And that, metaphorically, you can apply across everything. So
it's been a race to the bottom then, cram in as much of the cheapest stuff you possibly can while charging the highest price you can get away with. And there's been no checks and balances on that, on that mad rush to the bottom.
And I think, yeah, to sort of make your point, we've randomly got into massive trouble that's now really affecting our country, culture, NHS, diet-related disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, our old, our young, everything. And now we're realising that we cannot randomly get out of this. We have to be, you know, the public, your listeners, want scientists and geeks working hard in the background, making sure that luck and random doesn't happen. And for me, I think Sadiq today is a you know, ultimately these people that run society for us, and in this case it's a mayor, which is a very powerful local force. He has a certain amount of levers he can pull to protect London kids and parents and families. A year ago, he wasn't pulling them all, and that's why I wrote a love letter to London to say we can do better, London. And today, he started pulling as many as he can see. And I think that's a massive message to other mayors around the country. And I think globally, that's incredible. Now, if I may say one thing, 45 minutes on a plane in Amsterdam, 3 years ago, a deputy mayor did a multi-pronged similar strategy, and he reduced childhood obesity by 13% in 3 years. I want that for London.
Fair enough. Jamie Oliver, always a pleasure. I've been doing a bit of work on your behalf, mate. I've come up with a slogan for water.
Go for it.
Do you want to hear it? This is recorded from earlier. Here you go. You know what you ought to. Give your children water. Be kind to your daughter and your son. What do you reckon?
I love it. Let's jingle it up. Let's get it out there.
I thought I'd take some of the pressure off you, you know? I'd do some of the heavy lifting.
Well, someone needs to.
Jerry Oliver, always a pleasure. Thank you for your politeness. Have a great weekend. It's 10:56. So I asked Beth to jazz that up during the break before we played it out again. And she said, I've tried to set it to music, but your voice is so unbelievably monotone. Absolutely nothing works. Leon is in Brighton. Leon, back to the grown-up. What would you like to say?
Oh, hi, morning, James.
Hello.
Lovely to speak to you again. It's been a really, it's been a really interesting show so far. Quite a few
thanks, mate.
Decent comments made. Yeah, I think we're in the same age group. I grew up in the 70s as a child, and I remember when we had a billboard just across the road from where we lived, and I remember the very first KFC. Well, it was called Kentucky Fried Chicken in those days. I remember that going up, and my mum, in her wonderful Irish lilt, declared to the world that the end of the world was nigh because of this. And she was like, this is not food, this is really bad for you. Now, I'm not being funny. Having seen that, I remember over the next couple of years of my young life, I just actively sought out a branch of KFC wherever I could.
Yeah.
So that just kind of shows.
And back then we'd have it, you know, as you say, very rarely, and it would be quite a big treat. And they were quite hard to find. The one near me was on the road going into Birmingham. I actually remember specifically where it was. It was the only one I was aware of as a child, and it had an air of exoticism to it. It was almost like you know, quite sexy.
Yeah, similar to me. I mean, there was literally one which was a few miles away from us, but I didn't get to eat there anyway because it was too expensive. My mum was of the mindset that she's not buying that rubbish, so we really didn't get to eat it till much later. Just wanted to quickly move on to a point that was made about checks and balances and censorship, and they are all part of the process, but there has to be, and this is the point I wanted to make, viable alternatives, cheap, you know, produce, fresh produce that people can get access to, because I knew, you know, various families in London when I lived up there that were, you know, they were living on the breadline, to be honest.
Yeah, that is an issue.
They would, yeah, and they would send their kids down the road to pick up a £1.25p burger as opposed to cook for them. And you know, my heart bled when I saw that. Because at the end of the day, that's not nutritious. We, even, you know, a few years back, we had sort of clear ideas of the links between, you know, poor nutrition and really bad health.
Well, that's why what Jamie just said about it happening by accident, and it's not an accident from the point of view of the people who are making huge amounts of money out of it, but from the point of view of us doing the consuming and the spending, it has happened by accident. We haven't noticed this. I always enjoy the boiling a frog metaphor as you incrementally increase the temperature, and the frog, we've been boiled. We're boiled frogs, Leon, you and me.
Oh yeah, we're totally well cooked.
Well cooked, poached, fricasseed frog. Leon, thank you, mate. Thank you for the kind words. He's right as well. It has been a great show today because it's an hour on already, and I feel like I've barely drawn breath.